What does it mean to know something? A basic theory of knowledge called justified true belief, or JTB, has been a working model since Plato wrote his dialogue Theaetetus. The idea is simple. To know something, three things must happen. You must believe it, it must actually be true, and you must have a good reason or justification for believing it. Here's an example. Mrs. Smith is walking down the street. A car drives by. She looks inside and sees a girl who looks exactly like her daughter Morgan. Mrs. Smith believes Morgan is in the car. Morgan really is in the car, which is the truth. And Mrs. Smith has a good reason for her belief. She recognizes Morgan by sight. Since all three conditions are met, belief, truth, and justification, the JTB theory says that Mrs. Smith knows that Morgan is in the car. Are all three of these conditions necessary for knowledge? Let's check. First, we would not say that someone knows a fact if they do not believe that fact. If Mrs. Smith never forms a belief that Morgan is in the car, we would not say that she has knowledge of Morgan being in the car. So no belief, no knowledge. Second, we would not say that someone knows a fact if that fact is untrue. If Mrs. Smith believes Morgan is in the car, but the belief is false, we would not say she has knowledge of Morgan being in the car. So no truth, no knowledge. Third, if someone just happens to believe, with no reason, a fact that later turns out to be true, we would not say they have knowledge of that fact. Instead, this would be a lucky guess. If Mrs. Smith randomly guesses that Morgan is in the car, even if the belief ends up being true, we would not say that she has knowledge of Morgan being in the car. So no justification, no knowledge. So yes, belief, truth, and justification all seem necessary for knowledge. However, are all three conditions sufficient for knowledge? In 1963, philosopher Edmund Gettier provided examples whereby a person might have a justified true belief, but we still would not say they had knowledge. Let's go back to Mrs. Smith to illustrate this. Mrs. Smith is walking down the street, a car drives by, she looks inside and sees a girl who looks like her daughter Morgan. Mrs. Smith believes Morgan is in the car. Morgan really is in the car, which is the truth. And Mrs. Smith has a good reason for her belief. She recognizes Morgan by sight. However, the girl Mrs. Smith sees isn't Morgan at all, but is someone who looks like Morgan. Morgan is on the other side of the car, hidden from her view. Here we have all three conditions of JTB. Mrs. Smith forms a belief. The belief is true. There is justification for the belief. However, we would not say that Mrs. Smith has genuine knowledge that Morgan is in the car. Instead, Mrs. Smith's justified belief is only true by luck. This is what is called the Gettier problem. Therefore, justification, truth, and belief, while seeming to be necessary for knowledge, are not sufficient by themselves to provide it. Something else is needed. There have been many attempts to solve the Gettier problem by adding new rules to the JTB theory. One solution is called no false lemmas, which claims that a person's belief should not depend on anything false. For instance, since Mrs. Smith's recognition of Morgan is false, her belief building off that false recognition does not count as knowledge. Another solution is called Reliabilism, which claims that a person's belief must come from a method that is usually valid. For instance, we would not consider a quick glance at a moving object to be a reliable method for recognizing people. Thus, without a reliable method to inform it, Mrs. Smith's belief does not count as knowledge. These solutions try to protect knowledge from lucky accidents. However, they don't fully guarantee that our minds are really connected to reality and not just getting things right by chance. A completely different path is taken by an approach called Methodical Realism, or MR. Unlike theories that define knowledge in terms of justification and certainty, MR grounds knowledge in the disclosure of external reality to the mind. So we don't know things by having reasons to be certain of them. Instead, for MR, we know things when our judgment matches reality. We know something when we judge it, and our judgment reflects what is true. Let's return to Mrs. Smith to explore how this works. Mrs. Smith is walking down the street, a car drives by, she looks inside and sees a girl who looks exactly like her daughter Morgan. Mrs. Smith judges Morgan is in the car. Since Mrs. Smith's judgment matches reality, Mrs. Smith knows that Morgan is in the car. This knowledge is not based on having enough reasons, instead it is based on a judgment that is conformed to reality. How does MR handle the Gettier case? In the Gettier version, where Mrs. Smith believes Morgan is in the car based on seeing someone else, while Morgan coincidentally is in the car, MR would say that Mrs. Smith's judgment was based on misperception rather than being properly conformed to reality. Since Mrs. Smith's mind does not properly receive the real Morgan, her judgment does not truly match reality, but is only coincidental with something that is true. Thus, under MR, Mrs. Smith does not have real knowledge. Here, JTB theorists might provide some objections. First, if we stipulate that MR is right and that we know things when our judgments match reality, how do we justify our judgments? By which criteria do we say judgments are good or bad? MR cares about evaluating our judgments, but the purpose is not to seek certainty as it is in JTB. Instead, we evaluate judgments to better position our intellect to receive truth. For instance, Mrs. Smith may reflect on how the coherence of her judgment that Morgan is in the car may impact her capacity to receive the truth. This reflection can lead her to judge differently in a way that more closely matches reality. However, JTB theorists might push back. How do you ultimately know what you should and shouldn't believe? MR would respond that trust should align with how clear reality discloses itself. When reality seems confused, veiled, or strange, we may want to suspend judgment and investigate more. Similarly, if Mrs. Smith only captures a passing glance of Morgan, or her view is obscured, Mrs. Smith may want to withhold judgment on whether or not Morgan is in the car. Still, JTB might argue that sometimes we cannot know whether reality is clear or not. For instance, what if Mrs. Smith saw Morgan's identical twin sister? How can Mrs. Smith determine if reality is clear enough to earn the trust required for judgment? MR would concede that humans are fallible. We sometimes think we see clearly when we do not. However, this does not mean knowledge is impossible. Instead, it means we adopt a realistic epistemic humility, remain attentive, and always be ready to let reality correct our earlier judgments if a clear disclosure comes later. To further understand this, let's use the analogy of our judgments as a truth detector. For JTB, when the gauge reads truth, we would consider ourselves to have knowledge if the detector is correct, we believe it, and we have good reasons to believe the detector is operating properly. Epistemic responsibility for JTB means ensuring that we have internal justification for trusting the detector. However, even when all these conditions are met, the detector might coincidentally be giving a faulty truth reading, leading to erroneous knowledge. For MR, when the gauge reads truth, we have knowledge if the detector is actually tracking reality correctly. Our reasons for belief are important, but secondary to whether the reading genuinely matches the real world. Epistemic responsibility for MR means proportioning our trust to the clarity with which reality discloses itself, affirming when disclosure is clear, withholding judgment when the signal is unclear or confused, and when we cannot determine whether the signal is clear or unclear, adopting an attitude of epistemic humility, remaining cautious, receptive, and prepared to withhold firm judgment until further disclosure clarifies the situation. So what does MR provide that JTB lacks? Why does MR claim to be a superior theory of knowledge? JTB treats knowledge as something the mind must construct by assembling belief, truth, and justification. However, this construction remains vulnerable to lucky accidents and thus inevitably identifies instances of knowledge where no real connection to reality exists. MR, by contrast, defines knowledge as the mind's judgment conforming directly to the disclosure of being. In MR, knowledge is not dependent on subjective claims or internal justification, but on the faithful reception of reality as it gives itself. MR recognizes, because we are finite and fallible, our claims of knowledge may be mistaken. But this does not undermine the possibility of knowledge. It calls for epistemic humility. In this life, we never possess complete clarity of reality, and to chase after infallible certainty, as JTB encourages, is a fool's errand. Instead, MR calls us to use our best judgment and always be attentive and receptive to reality. Regardless of how confident we feel or how much evidence we possess, when our judgment conforms to reality, we know. When it does not, we do not.
And go for it.